first, I'd like to thank Dr. Liosto for organizing this, and of course, a very big thank you to Professor Carlo for continuously encouraging for all our presentations as well as our manuscripts submissions and so forth. Actually, this work is, we should say, half ours and 50% the reviewers and all the editorial teams in that sense. A huge transformation has changed this whole topic here. But basically to put in our passion in that sense was that in medical education, we use Bloom's taxonomy a lot, and mainly because we distinguish the lower order thinking skills from the higher order thinking skills. It is very easy to design curriculum with lower order thinking skills and asking the students to learn this and that. But when things get more complex, especially in terms of, for example, in neuroanatomy and others, then we find it, the lecturers find it very difficult to engage the students in higher order thinking skills. Now, we do actually use LMS in that sense, but the LMS is more of a linear in that sense, and simultaneously monitoring and participation can be done, but engagement as such is very few in terms of the engagement and motivation for students here itself. And more importantly, they do not talk to each other, especially with the other systems. And what in medical education we found out was classroom teaching should not be just only one part of an engagement, but we actually have a lot more to cover. And therefore, the social networking platforms actually has been proved to be allowing students to go beyond the classroom and yet to be engaged into that. So we're thinking about whether we can actually marry the concepts of educational game, design and development them, but not just only as a game per se, but one of the inherent things about the addictiveness of games, which we found in our students, was that they liked the challenge. And the challenge was that you circums one level after the other, and the more levels you increase, the more challenging it becomes, more engaged they become automatically. We don't have to do anything into that. So that feature of games we wanted to engage here to create higher levels of a neuroanatomy course and a curriculum in that sense. And that higher level of games we wanted to actually do with a higher, what we call as the thinking skills, higher order thinking skills from Bloom's taxonomy to include into that aspects in that sense. So this one was a little bit of a new thing for us, so that we studied about the topics for neuroanatomy. That means studying the different cranial nerves, how they go in, what are their functions, what happens if they are destroyed, and what signs and symptoms are produced, and included that into a gamification process so that the students first learn the basics, then go on, and as they go in with learning the game, they also learn the complexity of that topic itself. So basically, it was around three themes. We integrated the curricular approach. Now, one of the advantages of integrating games was that we could integrate multidisciplinary approach in that sense. Now, cranial nerves is studied through anatomy, physiology, as well as clinical skills, the signs and symptoms. It is very hard for lecturers in order to integrate all that into one curriculum as such. Whereas games can allow what will happen if this actually happens, you need to know about this, that rule. The rule of the game is actually the content of that medical curriculum that we are talking about. So they learn about that in order to play the game and then excel in the game, increasing levels of complexity here itself. One of the advantages that we did was we had a lot of engagement and interaction tools inherent into games, like rapid fire questions suddenly comes in and there will be a timer for that. You have to put in through leaderboards so that various teams, small groups will actually be able to play simultaneously across each other and see how they are scoring in that sense. Immediately you reach a step, you'll have instantaneous feedback. And most importantly, because we have integrated that to Facebook, they can actually track their progress of how, at what level have they reached, how long have they taken, how many instances have they taken to reach that level, and how are they matching against their peers in that sense. So this one was a huge benefit in terms of their learning, which we didn't have to do much, but just allowing them to practice the games at various levels. Now, what we did was with the games was, and we recently had the World Cup, and most people are aware. Usually, the soccer games are quite popular here. So we put that into a preliminary league, quarterfinal, semi-final, and a final level stage of the games, so that the students will, oh, I have reached the semi-finals. Oh, have you? I have yet to reach that, in that sense, and they will be comparing and discussing in that sense here. And then what we did was we studied the levels of learning behavior which was expected from the students, and saw how they have achieved across the times as they are going in. So one of the other things which we found it as a little bit of offshoot for them, because we were using Facebook, we allowed them to create small web pages and spaces so during their gaming. So what they used to do is they used to put in a little bit of resources of what they found out. You see, you have to go through this resource in order to excel into that game. This is the tip. This is the trick. So they actually were learning much more about the content and the curriculum just by playing the game and sharing the tips and tricks within the Facebook that they actually have. So that contributed a lot to the asynchronous online learning environment which we created in that sense. We use other techniques also, like the balsamic technique, to find out how we could replicate the gamified quizzes before they were actually implemented. And we used the Articulate Studio to create a lot of these games in that sense. Now, the base part of using the Facebook as a platform to using the games was they could literally use that as a social media and a networking to pair up, see how people are doing against each other, and also to give feedback as they are going through their learning journey in that sense. So we were actually having a little bit of exciting, playful. They could actually roll in dices, get quizzes, get clinical cases, and so on and so forth. Most of these quizzes were actually clinical cases. That means they were actually scenarios on which we put in through. What we did allow was that they had to reach a specific level before they can go on to the next level of the game. However, they can revisit the game, and automatically the game will be present in a little bit of different manner so that they don't get bored. Now, this one was a huge characteristic which we found in medical education. As you know, most medical education achieves to get the students achieve a level of competency as a skill work. And to do that, they need to repeat a skill in order to achieve that level of competency. We found playing a game at one level, getting into the noos and cons and the different pros and cons and the nooks and corners of a game and the rules and the content allowed them to actually achieve a fantastic achievement level before they went on to the next step. So that's one of the reasons why we found out that the Facebook, which we use also as a research tool, because it has an insights where we can actually get the likes, engagements, reach, page actions. We found out that for the initial games, the engagement was huge, and they used to repeatedly use the games in order to gain excessive levels of competencies in that sense. The other thing that we used for the games was because of the Facebook, as you know, is a normal social platform. So they will actually chat within themselves to find out, by the way, I know I'm not going to get you the trick, but how did you really solve that issue in that sense? So here, the students themselves as peers will give some tips, but not the direct answer, so that they will not build up the competition and yet would like to share, I have done this, but with some games, I found out that resource. You have to go to that resource to find out the answer. I'm not going to give you that, but that would allow students to go to various other resources and outcomes put them through. We evaluated this whole study based on activity theory. I'm not going to the details of that. Please go through the papers, and we have highlighted that in details. And thanks to our reviewers, where we could actually get a lot of good sense about that activity theory. But more importantly, we found out that as we increase the complexity level at the lower contextual level, middle contextual level, and higher contextual level, the intended outcomes were actually achieved to a greater extent, especially at the higher levels of Bloom, especially evaluations, analyzing applications, concepts, as we go through that different games here itself. Okay, so the students actually love the way how they have to critically think in the different concept before they can answer. They can actually have negative points and answering that. So in normal day-to-day circumstances in a classroom, if you say, oh, you have to think critically and can you give me the answer, half of the students will be disengaged. Why should I think? Okay, whereas playing the game to think, in that sense, in the score points and gain badges, that automatically came their way. So therefore, that actually allowed them to achieve that higher level of Bloom's taxonomy in that sense. Okay. So we found that there was a little shift in superficial to a deep learning in that sense, especially strategizing, planning the game, how do that higher level. So they're getting stuck, how they would maneuver, to get out of this obstacle and go in for better resources was a fantastic way of them finding out those here itself. Okay, so one of the things that we actually found out was that this one was more of an authentic learning. We actually based clinical scenarios in the games, and therefore when they actually solved, they actually became a little bit of what called as clinical sleuths or detectives in solving those problems. So they learned, they played a game, and they actually found out, oh, I could find out their actual problem and the solution and diagnosis for that. So literally clinical diagnosis and discussions are literally like that. But we don't usually equate games with that. Here, the students are playing games and achieving those outcomes, higher order outcomes into that in that sense. So one of the other things that we've actually found out was, as many of my predecessors actually also found out, that the peer learning, basically in the peer collaboration, was fantastic. So at one stage, the students are quite used to playing online games and collaborative. This is very, very normal. So they, and in fact, play more games than they study. So now, because the study has been given them that peer online games, so they were fascinated with it. And at the same time, suddenly realized, oh my God, by that I could actually answer this quiz. I could answer this task and something like that. That actually imbibed a little bit more motivation and engagement into that. So I think that this gamification, we found out, was an additive experience. So, and it was a very fruitful experience. We are actually reusing those games that we have developed for many years in that sense, modifying that. And every year we find out that some additive experiences and that my motivations and engagement was amazing, to say the least. I would just welcome all of you to go through our papers and share your ideas. And thank you again, the editors, co-editors, and especially the reviewers here itself. This was a fantastic topic. And we learned, we are from Monash, and our logo is basically Ankaro Imparo, or we are still learning. And this manuscript preparations and the publication was as much as a learning as well as a fun as we develop the games for our students. Thank you very much.
I have one philosophical thought. I just posted it on the chat.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's one of the reasons is that nowadays, basically, students are actually finding out more new social medias and others in that sense. And yet, usually what they do is they still communicate either with Facebook chat or WhatsApp in that sense. We never restricted their communications. What we found out was that suddenly when the teachers told them, you simply play a game and your learning outcomes will be achieved, that they found out was ridiculous in that sense. How can just simply playing and allowing them to play an online game in the classroom, which is, you can see that one was actually a classroom in that sense, and playing that. So this one was the first time that the teachers was allowed overhead onto them, and they were saying is, oh, are you sure this is the rule of the game? That's the strategy which you should adopt. And suddenly they found that they were at level playing game with a game that we can actually share in that sense here. Absolutely, Prof. Carlo. Nowadays, basically, so what they are doing is they are actually instantaneous messages. They are using WhatsApp in that sense. They are using the Facebook as a repository for the resources they actually have used in that sense, and the ways that they are putting in through. Because the search function for some of these resources in Facebook is much better than the WhatsApp in that sense, because WhatsApp tends to be a little bit of linear in that sense here. So for instantaneous chat, the students now only use WhatsApp, literally, absolutely here itself. But as a repository of games and playing games, I found that the Facebook was actually, especially the research tool of the analysis, which we could not find in WhatsApp and other social media, was quite helpful for us.